Now let's add functionality behind that add new property button. So how are we going to allow users to add a new property? Well, there's probably a ton of different ways to do this, but we're going to use a pop-up to do this, or a focus group. Other ways you could do it probably include just making a whole nother page and directing a user to there, but I feel like a pop-up will do just fine here. Let's select our focus group or group focus. Let's drag that on the screen, kind of large, say about that big. Let's give it a reference element of the nav bar. So come select that, and you can see it's not centered, so let's give it an offset a little bit. Let's say 40 and see if that doesn't center it. Not even close. So let's make it a little bit bigger, first of all. Instead of fixed, let's do a column, and then uncheck our fixed width, of course. We'll give it a 0. Notice it bleeds off the page a little bit. All right, so if I move it back, let's see what happens. Give it the offset of 0. You can see it's still bleeding off the page. So we'll give it the offset of 40 again. Let's come to layout and give it a max width. So let's do an 80%, which means it's only going to take up 80% of the screen space available to it. So that looks pretty centered to me. It is still quite large. Let's make it a bit bigger. Give this a 500 minimum height for now. So this is fine for now. Let's start working on what we're gonna actually put in our form. Remember, when a user clicks that button, we wanna display this focus group, and then we wanna have them fill out some type of form. So let's build that form. Now remember, let's rename this to group focus. Let's call it add property. Great, so now we can reference our group focus. We know what it's called. Let's start adding our elements to it. The first thing we'll add is probably a prompt saying what we're asking for or the information that we're requesting. So let's change the text to prompt the user with a question and let them know what information we're looking for. So we'll say, what type of property are you listing? Question mark. And then let's change the format of this. Let's come and give it a style attribute. So we'll select heading 1, and let's change what our heading 1 looks like. So let's edit the style. And then in here, let's change the font to way less. Let's do 18. Let's bold it. We'll do a center align. We'll do all black. Let's come back and see what that looks like. You can see, let's unfocus and refocus that so it's where we need it to be. That looks okay. Let's go and edit the style a bit more. We want to come to the layout. Let's actually center the text vertically. Let's also give this a center align instead of left, and let's see what that looks like. So we're in our design, we'll unhide and rehide this, or hide and unhide, and then it pops up back in the middle. So we see our question right here. Now it prompts the user of, what kind of information they're going to be putting in. Let's ask them for that information or give them a way to select. So how are we going to do this? Well, keep in mind when we set up our database, we came to our options and we made property types. And what did we give? We gave an apartment, a house, a self-contained storage, a unique space. We can also associate an image with that. So let's go back into our design, and that's going to snap to the top left after you refresh or leave the page. Just keep that in mind. Let's add a way to view our options. So, of course, we're going to add a repeating group. Let's drag that on. Now, in this case, we actually do want the 4 rows and 1 column, as that's how many options we were given. So let's change the layout a bit. Let's come and give it a row alignment. Let's center it, and then let's get rid of the fixed width. Make that cover the screen. We'll give it a 0. Actually, on this, I want to give it a max width. Let's say we give a percent. Let's do 70% and see what that looks like. Still a little big. Let's even go like 40%, because we don't want it taking up the entire page. We're going to land on 50. Great, that looks a lot better. Let's start inputting some information in there and collecting the data we need to display. First, let's give it a little bit bigger of a minimum height so I have room to work with. Let's give it a 500. Great, so now I'm going to enter the property information or the type of properties they can add. So we need to add our information, and we come to our type of content. And what are we looking for? Well, our property type. Well, what kind of property type or what options? We're going to grab them all. So we're looking for all of our property types, and we just want to display all of them. We will uncheck our fixed row number. The reason being, if you add options later, you want to capture those and display those. If you have fixed to 4, and you add another option, it won't display. So let's uncheck that. And let's add the information we want to display. First thing we'll do is select a text box, drag that over. See, it's centered. We don't actually want that centered, but when we do drag another element over, they will be in a row format. So we can leave this for now. Let's come to our appearance, and we'll just add the text. So for our insert dynamic data, we're going to select the current cell's property type, and then just the display. Now the display is going to be that text information that we gave it. So that's exactly what we're looking for. The next thing we're going to want to do is display an image. So let's come and select an image. So you can see they snapped right next to each other. We actually want to give that space between. Let's come to our layout. Let's give it that space. And that looks a lot better. Now we want to bring this element down a bit. So let's do that. Let's edit. We'll come to our layout. Again, vertical align. We want it centered, so it drops it down. Same with the image. We'll drop that down. And here we want to play with that aspect ratio again. And let's select a 1:1, and we'll see what that looks like. See, it takes up the top of the space and the bottom of the space. We don't want that. Let's give it a little bit more room. Let's do 100 pixels. And let's give a top and margin bottom. So let's do that, 20 pixels by 20. That gives it some space between that next image. So that looks good. And let's display the image. So what are we doing? Well, essentially the same thing. Insert dynamic data. Current cell's property type. This time, just select the image. We'll process with ImageX. And then let's just select resize to fit the dimensions by cropping. And we can go ahead and close that. And now we're going to display that name of whatever the property type is, as well as the image. Now, before we can even preview this, though, we need to establish a workflow on our button. So right now, nothing is happening. So let's hide this. We'll select our button, and we'll edit a workflow. Now again, we've done this before, but let's do it again together. For this to work, we need to select an element action, and we want to show something when they click the button. What do we want to show? Well, we want to show that repeating focus group. So you'll come and select your group focus, add property, and we could add a conditional there, and we probably should. We're going to skip that for now. Let's go to our design and preview what happens. So we'll select add a new property, and then you can see our box comes up, and you have our images, as well as the name. Now, this looks absolutely disgusting. So let's go back in our design and fix this. So we're in our design. Now you can see it's not centered. So let's fix that and change the offset. Let's give it like a 250 and see if that's like close to center. It looks pretty close, good enough for our purposes. Let's change this now to take up a bit more of the width. So let's do that. Let's add our layout. And we'll come here to our max width of 50%. Let's change that width from 50% to unlimited. And then it's going to take up as much space as required. But you can see now it's touching the right side. So let's give it that 40 right. Perfect. So that looks a lot better. The other thing I want to do is give it a border of some sort. So we'll edit. And we'll come to our appearance. Let's see what we can't do with the border. Right now there is none. Let's do a solid. Let's do some roundness. So we'll give it a 10 pixel roundness, maybe even more defined. Let's do 20. Then for the shadow style, let's do outset. We'll leave as is. And let's see what that looks like now. See if it doesn't come off the page a bit and look a little better. So come out of debug mode. Add a new property. That looks a little better. Still looks like shit. So let's go change that a bit more. Now let's add a shadow to our parent container. So we'll come here, we'll go to our borders and scroll down to shadow style. Let's give it an outset. We want to make these 0 and 0 so it is centered. Let's make our blur radius a little bit bigger. Actually, let's keep that 4. Let's do a spread radius of 2. Call it 8. And then let's see what that looks like. I also want to move this to cover over our information on the left side of the page. So let's move that back. Let's actually change where it is on the page or the offset. And we'll just do 50 and see what that looks like. It's covering it a little bit. I actually want to do 20. Great. So that's kind of where I want it to pop up on this left side of the page. Let's also make sure we have a border for our parent group. So we'll come to appearance. Right now we don't have a border. Let's give it a solid border. Give it some border roundness of 20, meaning the edges round off a bit. And then let's do something about those repeating groups that are showing lines. We don't want that. So you come to your separators, and instead of solid, we'll just select none. That should get rid of our separators. Let's preview and see what this looks like. So we'll get out of debug mode. We'll select, and that looks a whole lot better already. I still don't like this outside border here. So let's get rid of that, but I think we can continue on with this pop-up. To get rid of this outside border, let's just go to Edit, and we'll select our borders as none instead of solid. That should get rid of our border. Great. So now let's continue on and add the rest of our information within this group. So let's edit the size of this and give it a bigger height so we have room to work with. Let's give it 1,000 pixels just so we can scroll down and add more info. The next thing we want to do is add another title to prompt the user what information we're asking for. Simply copy and paste, and let's change the text. So let's ask them for their property address. What is your property's address? Great, so let's give them a way to input their property address now. So to do this, all we're gonna do is select our search box. Now we haven't used this before, but essentially it can operate as an input as well as search for different choices that we select. Now let's fix the alignment a little bit here. So right now you can see it's over 40. This is just kind of floating in the center. We kind of wanna align these right here. So how do we do that? Let's edit. Let's align that text to the left. So appearance, align the text to the left, and then let's give this a maximum width or infinite width. And then let's change and add a margin on either side. So instead of our 80 here, let's just do infinite. Then let's give it our left and right of 20. And that should actually be 40 since we're 40 on the other element. We want them aligned. Let's do 40, and that looks a lot better. Great, so now they're aligned. Let's start seeing what we can do with our search box and how this works. Well, we come to our appearance, and it's asking us for type of choices. Now, if we select our drop-down, see we have static, dynamic, and geographic places. We actually want those geographic places because that's going to allow us to search for various properties and locations. Now let's start gathering all the other information required per our database. So let's go back and look at that. Well, if you go back to our data types, you can see that under property, we need to collect all of this information. In fact, this is a better view. If you come to our properties, you can see this is probably your view. I made a new one just so I could see different data points such as address, title, property type. But we're going to need all of these fields you see here. So we need to start collecting that, and we need a way to do that. And that's why we're adding all of this in our UI here. Let's fix those typos because that is going to be very annoying. Property address. There we go. Now let's move on. What's the next thing we're going to collect? We're probably going to ask them how many guests are allowed to stay at this property. So again, let's copy and paste the text box, change the text. What is your capacity for this property? Meaning how many guests can stay here. So what is your capacity for the property? So let's make a couple labels and input fields so a user can tell us exactly the capacity of the property. Now remember, we need a child count, adult count, room count, etc. So we need to add all of those fields. So let's start adding our inputs and text boxes so we can do this. We want to start with a group though, because remember, we're going to row each thing inside of a group and our parent is a column. So keep that in mind when you're building this. Let's drag a group on the page and let's format it a little bit. We'll come to layouts. Let's give it a row. We'll center align, get rid of that fixed width and make this min width a 0. Then let's give it that 40 pixel left and right. And that looks a lot better already. Now let's input our text and our input box. So we'll have a text and then we'll have an input. So let's find our input box and this is where they'll type in that number. So we'll have that there and we'll have our input. Let's give a space between. So we'll come to our layout. We'll give it that space so they're evenly distributed apart from each other. Now we want to vertically align. So we'll vertically align both elements and then let's fix that width. So right now the width is fixed. Let's uncheck, give it that 0. And you can see it pushes this all the way to the end, but it's taking up a lot of space. So let's fix that as well. We want this to be not a fixed width. We want it to be a 0 pixel min. That looks a ton better. So they're taking up 50-50, evenly spaced out. Let's change the text, and we'll just say we're looking for adult information. So adults, or we'll say number of adults. Great, so they can put the number of adults that they can fit in that property right here. Now the type of content is actually going to be a number, so make sure you do that. We'll select integer. Now they should be able to type a number, and they see number of adults. Let's actually make the text a little bit bigger here. Let's give it an 18, and let's see what bolding it looks like. Yep, that looks a lot better. So now we can just copy this group and paste it a bunch of times. So we'll paste. Now we've run out of space, so let's make our parent a little bit bigger. Instead of 1,000, let's do 2,000, because we're going to need a lot of space. Now, we will be adding a scroll bar to this, so we're actually not going to be using all of this space. It's going to be able to scroll once it hits a certain point. But let's keep moving on and adding what we need here. So we have number of adults. Let's paste it one more time. So we'll do number of children. Then we will do number of rooms. And then we'll do number of bathrooms. So that should be all of our number of items that we need to collect. They're going to enter that information here. We need to label this because otherwise we're not going to know what information we're getting later. So input A is going to be number of adults. Then we'll have number of children, number of rooms, and then number of bathrooms. Great. So now we're going to know which is which. Number of bathrooms. Now, I don't see a purpose of renaming our groups. We don't really need that information, I don't think, but who knows, we might be changing that later. We have our inputs. We know what information is going in that, and that's really what we need to look out for. So let's move on to the next thing we need to collect, and that will be details about our property. Just copy this, paste it down here, and now we're going to ask the user what kind of details they would like to add. So we'll say, please provide details about your property. Question mark. We have that. Now, what are we collecting? Well, again, you could go reference your database. You come back, and you can see all the additional fields. So we need to collect things like AC or kitchen or price, property space, Wi-Fi, washing machine, etc. Let's go do that and gather all of that information. Come to our design. So the first thing we're looking for is the property space. Now remember when we did our options, come to data, look at your option sets, and property space, we have entire place, private room, or shared room. We want a user to be able to select that, and to do this, we're going to be using radio buttons. So let's go find our radio buttons element, and we'll drag that over here, just like so. It populates way at the top for some reason. Now you can see we have our choices. Let's go ahead and format this really quick. Come to our layout. Uncheck fixed width, make it 0. Let's give it the 40 left and right. Great. Now we have our choices in here. What do we want to add though? We want this to be dynamic. We don't just want to have choice 1. So instead of static choice, let's select dynamic. And then for type of choices, well, what are we looking for? We're looking for that property space. Then it's going to give us options to find what source and an option caption. Now for the choice source, we need to select all of the property spaces we have available. Again, we're doing it as dynamic as possible, meaning if you go back and add more options, they will display here in your radio buttons. So you don't need to continuously update your UI. It's important to note that when building that you're going to be adding stuff to your choices and your data. So you need to build a UI that allows you to update that, especially if you're going to give admin access to another user. So for our option caption, just go ahead and select current option display. And that will be everything we need to display our dynamic choices. If we were to go and preview this, you would just see the options I showed you earlier and what we have in our option set. Now let's fix the layout a little bit to just snap and fit the height to content. So we'll give it a min height of 0. And that looks great. The next thing we're going to want to do is get the kitchen, Wi-Fi, washing machine, etc. But we can't use radio buttons because they can have multiple. In our space, they can only have one. So what would we use? Well, let's use a checkbox. So we'll drag that checkbox on our screen like so, and drag it down. Let's give it some space in between. So let's give it a 20 top margin. And then for the bottom, we'll also give it 20. Left and right will still be that 40, of course. So it's nice and even. Now let's edit that checkbox. So we'll come and edit the checkbox itself. We won't make it a fixed width. We'll give it a 0 min width, just like so. And now let's edit what is actually going to be displayed. So the labels are actually going to be the same, meaning we just need to see if they have AC, and that will be label 1. So if they check this and they get AC, let's remember to change that height. So we'll give this a 0 min height. That looks great. So let's just copy and paste this. Boom, boom, boom. Now you can see there's a bit of a distance between them. We actually don't want that. Let's get rid of that 20 pixel margin on the bottom. And then for top and bottom on the rest of them, let's just change it to 0 so they're right next to each other. Layout 0, 0, 0, and 0. Great. That looks a lot better. They can check these. Let's change the title of each one. So we'll have kitchen. We'll have washing machine. And then we'll have Wi-Fi. Great, so we have all the information. Now, when a user checks this, we're not ready to update our database yet, but essentially when a user checks one of these boxes, we will update the database to reflect that value. Now, we're almost done with our UI. I know this takes some time to set up, so just bear with me, and let's keep moving forward. And to save time, let's actually copy and paste some of our elements up here. So we'll copy, paste, and paste. Let's give this some top margin and just space between it from the other group. Right now it has none on the top and bottom, so let's go to layout. Let's give it a 20 top and bottom. That gives some distance between the two. Now what we can do is just change the text, and let's say enter your property title. Great, so enter your property title, and what else do we need? Well, we allow them to enter a description, so enter your property description. Great, so we have these created, but remember we made this an integer. We do want to have that as a text in this case. So make sure you change those, and we're all set with our property title and description. Let's move on to our categories. So let's copy another element just to save time. We'll copy and paste this down here. Let's change it up a little bit on the layout because it's taking up quite a bit of room. Give it a 0 minimum height, and then we'll give it some top margin, let's say 20. Not 2 minus 20. Gives it some separation. Even 40 would probably look a little bit better. Now we can have this say something like, please select your categories. Now remember, we entered a ton of categories, so they're going to have multiple options. And how do we do this? Well, the best way to do this is probably to get some form of drop down, but Bubble out of the box doesn't really offer us an option where we can have multiple categories listed in a drop-down and then display them in our input. So let's go into our plugins and see what we can't find. We'll add a plugin, and then we'll look for a right there, multi-select drop-down. So let's install that. Let's go to Done, come back to our design, and let's see what that looks like. So we'll select our multi drop-down, like so. And it displays all the way at the top for some reason. Let's drag that down. And you can see it's already letting us choose some options. We have a lot of options to choose from. Before we get into that, let's go to our layout. Of course, let's fix all of this again. You're going to be doing this a lot, so you're going to be getting good at it. Let's go to our margins, give it the 40 left and right. And then it should be even with our text box. That looks way better. Now let's see what options we have available to us. So you can see right now it has static choices. Probably never going to want static, so let's do dynamic. Now you can see it's letting us select type of choices. Let's see what our options are. Well, we're in our category, so we probably want our category. And then we probably want all of the categories associated with our option set. So that's great. Let's select all of our options. And then for our display, we simply want to select the current options display, and that should list all of the categories that we may select. Now we're almost done. We just need to capture that price per night, as well as the images that get uploaded. So let's copy this title, paste it down here, change the text, and say, please enter your price per night. Like so. So let's just copy an input now, and we'll paste it down here. And all we need to do is change the layout a little bit, come to your layout, and we'll change the margins. We'll give it that 40 left and right. Now somebody should be able to enter a price, But let's go change what type of format the content is. So right now it is text. Let's see if we can't find a price or currency. We do have currency. Let's select that with a dollar. Always show decimals. We don't need to include that for now. We just want them to enter a price and us be able to capture that info. Now, we did forget to label our inputs up here. See, there's still number of adults. That happens when you copy different elements. Got to make sure you change those. So we have number of adults, but we want our property title. Here, we're going to want our description. So property description. And then we want to change our input down here, which is price per night. So we can just do PPN, and then we'll know what information we're selecting when we're updating our database. Now we need to capture the images that users can upload. Again, we're in a situation where Bubble really doesn't offer us exactly what we need. We need to be able to upload multiple images. So again, let's come to our plugin. Let's see what we have available. We'll do multi. You can see we have this multi-file uploader. Exactly what we want. So let's download that. Let's come back to our design. Now, before we use that uploader, let's just copy and paste one of these texts so we can prompt the user with what they're doing. We'll say, please upload all of your property images. Say something like, please upload property images. That way they know what they're uploading. Then we can use our multi-file uploader to capture those. So drag that on your screen. Bubble conveniently places it at some random spot. Of course, let's drag it down right there, and let's fix the layout just a little bit. Uncheck our fixed width. Give it that 0. Give it our margins, 40 left, 40 right. Let's give it a top of 20. That looks a lot better, so they can drag and drop files here. And then the last thing we want to do is have some sort of submit button. So again, let's make our group a little bigger, just so we have some space to work with. 2000s to 2100. Now we have a little bit more space, and let's drag a button because we need a way to submit all this information. Let's drag a button like so. You can see Bubble, again, puts it in some obscure place. We'll drag it down anyways. Thanks, Bubble. Go to Layout. We'll put it in the middle. Give it a top margin of, say, 20. And then let's change the text. We'll say Submit Property. That's what's going to capture all of the information. All of the workflow is going to occur here. Everything else we just did was to capture the info. So we'll submit a property, and let's change the layout of the button a bit more. Not a fixed width. We want it a 0. Let's give it that 40 left and 40 right. Great. So we have this big submit property button, which is exactly what we want. But now that we have that UI to capture all of the data, we can begin our workflow and working on that submit button because we need to update the database with all this information that was given to us by the user. So let's do that in the next lesson. Honestly, on this one, if you need a break, go for that walk, grab another coffee, but let's sit down and update our submit property button. So I'll see you in the next lesson for that.